Building on Cerner with SMART and FHIR. My name is Keven Shekleton, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Yegor Henoff. We both work at Cerner. First, a little bit about each of us. So, I have been at Cerner for 15 years now. I'm a Vice President and Distinguished Engineer at Cerner. What that means is I still code, and I have several responsibilities. I'm responsible for all of our mobile development, as well as our security within engineering, but what you guys care about is I'm also responsible for SMART and FHIR at Cerner and some of our newer interoperability standards and support, so things like CDS hooks as well. These days, I've programmed in many different languages over my career at Cerner. These days, I mostly do Ruby and web development, though I've done a bunch of different things in the past.
And I'm Yegor Henoff. I'm Director in our Open Services Development Group. My responsibilities are primarily executing the project plan around SMART and FHIR implementations, as well as running of our development program, which we'll get into a little more detail later.
So, for those who aren't familiar with Cerner, a little bit about us. So, we're quite large now. We have over 20. Actually, these numbers are a little bit out of date. We have over 27,000 associates or employees working at Cerner. To put things in perspective, when I started at Cerner 15 years ago, there was 3,000 of us worldwide, and now we're at 27,000. So it's quite huge growth. We have lots and lots of clients worldwide, though certainly the U.S. is our largest market. We're a big EHR vendor, but we do a lot more than just actually creating EHRs. We're in a lot of different markets in healthcare. So this probably isn't a shocker to all of you, but APIs are something that's transformed many different industries, and we think and believe that it's going to transform the healthcare industry as well. The power of APIs is that it allows disparate systems to connect and talk to each other over a common language. Obviously, we're going to be talking about FHIR and SMART today. Those are two examples of such APIs. And we're a big believer in supporting APIs, especially open APIs, to allow third parties to develop on top of our platform. One of the things that we believe is that EHRs are going to become, or at least our EHR is going to become an open platform. So there's only so much that Cerner can do, and there's only so many different things that we're going to focus on as an EHR vendor. And by making our EHR a platform for others to develop upon, supporting standards like SMART and FHIR will allow third parties, both clients, that's hospitals or healthcare organizations, or developers, to create their own applications or their own extensions that can be plugged directly into the EHR as a seamless part of the workflow. So that means that while our EHR may support like the core functionality, the stuff that it does today, so adding users or prescribing medications and that sort of thing, there's a lot of things on the edge that we're not going to get into as a company because we don't have the interest or the resources or frankly the expertise to get into, and that's where others can innovate. That's not to say that we don't think that other companies are going to do some of the core functionality as well, but certainly I think the majority of focus is going to be on those things that are happening at the edge, the things that are in specialty sites. The other thing, and I've talked a bit about this, is that we're not going to be able to do everything, and we don't want to do everything because we know we're not going to be able to do it as well as other companies with other focuses than us. We're also seeing increasingly that clients, so hospitals, don't just have one EHR vendor. As the market is consolidating, as hospitals are acquiring other systems, or as they switch vendors, they're increasingly encountering environments where there are multiple EHR vendors that they're dealing with. And in those scenarios, the hospital wants to have functionality that exists across both of those vendors. And that's where open standards really come into play as well. So they can have an application that is, say, a SMART and FHIR application that can work in their Epic system as well as their Cerner system and Allscripts system. And it's the same application between all three EHRs. So that's another reason why we think open EHRs and supporting open standards are important. So again, our vision for our open platforms is to allow others to advance the state of a healthcare's functionality, their capabilities through these open standards and through supporting all that. So the way in which Cerner does that is we've branded our open platforms and open APIs the Ignite APIs. You can think of it right now as being SMART and FHIR. So here at the bottom, I've got Millennium Systems, and Millennium is for those that don't know, Millennium is our core EHR platform that exists. This is has existed now for 20 plus years. It's in use it's by far, we have several different EHRs that have come through, the other EHRs have come through acquisitions, but Millennium was written by Cerner from the ground up in the mid-90s, and each client has an instance of Millennium, which is represented down here by each one of these stacks. We have clients that have their own version of Millennium or their own instance of Millennium, but then we also have smaller institutions that can pay for Millennium as a service effectively. But each one of these Millenniums can be connected up with our Ignite APIs. Our Ignite APIs actually exist in the cloud. So our FHIR server is actually sitting in the cloud on top of all of these Millennium environments, which means that there's actually one instance of the Ignite API. So our FHIR API has just a single instance for all of these Millennium clients. As a developer, that is a huge deal because what that means is you have a single URL, like a single base URL for all of those Millennium clients, and we manage the complexities of every client having a different Millennium version from you. So the FHIR API is consistent across the entire Cerner client base, which is a huge, huge advantage. So as a developer, if you're writing mobile apps or desktop or patient-facing or provider-facing apps, all of these apps connect to those Ignite APIs, and through that same API, that single API, and you don't have to worry about the versions. So as we add new resources, as we make corrections, as we add support for newer FHIR versions, we update it here, and it takes effect for all Millennium clients underneath here. So you have nothing to worry about in terms of juggling different versions. So yes.
You do this. I assume some of your clients are running the stacks like in a local data center, and you host also all the data in the cloud, and you maintain consistency from FHIR to all those underlying databases?
Yeah, so the question is what about our clients that run their own Millennium stack in their own data center? And we do have some clients like that, and yes, this model still exists. We're not actually copying any data from the source data, the source of truth still remains in every Millennium system. So the FHIR APIs, actually, when you make a call to say, read a patient, that actually comes in through our cloud kind of tier here and goes directly down to the client's database and retrieves the data out. So we're not caching data, we're not syncing it. When you do writes with FHIR, it's also going directly down. So if we were to create a EHR system from scratch today, obviously we would have everything in the cloud, right? But given our history, we're not in that scenario. But by designing our architecture this way, we really did it for all of you, the developers, because we knew that it would be a nightmare for you guys to have to juggle what Millennium versions the client has and which FHIR resources they have or what versions and stuff. And so this gets abstracted away from all of you. So again, when we add any new FHIR resource, make any sort of change, we actually update the cloud layer as well as we have a local component that gets installed there, and that gets updated automatically as well too. So this is a pretty big difference between other vendors supporting FHIR. Also, I should note too, all of our API for FHIR is actually on the public internet. So it's obviously secured in production with OAuth 2 using the SMART on FHIR authorization model, but the API is available over the public internet, which means you don't have to worry about any sort of like VPN or IP whitelisting or anything like that. So the APIs are very easy to consume from anywhere, whether it be mobile app or browser, so forth. And I talked through everything that I just said that was on this slide, so I don't need to cover this. Hand it over to Diego here to cover the rest.
All right. As part of my job, I work with the developer program, and one thing that came into focus pretty quickly is that being open is a lot more than just having an API that is available publicly and hosted in the cloud. There's a whole set of other issues that we have to deal with as we collaborate with different developers. So in parallel to the technical track where we're building new resources and making them available, we are also building a business program and trying to make sure that it is as easy to engage with and as easy to work through for developers as our technology is. And frequently what we find is that the technology part is what we can all do much easier. The business, frequently we're still catching up on some of the aspects as we work with different developers. So to kick things off, code.cerner.com is the front door into our business program. That is the website that holds a lot of different information about the API itself, developer documentation that we'll get into a little more detail soon, has our own app gallery, which contains the applications that have gone through our developer program, has some information around frequently asked questions and how to enter into the developer program as well. And really that website is sort of a crucial part of this ecosystem that we're building. And we're not seeing any of the light gray arrows as I just noticed. So there's a lot more arrows on this slide, and they basically connect different aspects like the developer community to the developer experience to Cerner Cloud API and client. And what this intends to portray is that what we're essentially building is a developer ecosystem where we're trying to act as a facilitator on developer side of building applications that fit into the EMR, that use the standards API properly, get the data that is necessary for the application, as well as our clients who can come to us or work with developers directly and then have assurance that these applications that they're consuming running against the standards-based API, that they go through all the security layers, that there's scale behind it that is guaranteed by Cerner, and that these applications have been reviewed and have gone through our validation program to achieve a certain expectation of quality, extensibility, and so on. Essentially, what this ecosystem allows us to do is ensure three key principles that our clients and our developers expect when they engage into that ecosystem. First one, access, means that all of the technology that we have, the API itself, all the documentation, the business processes, everything is available freely. You can read up on it, you can engage with us, you can work with us, and have access to all of the tools you need. Trust is a big concern when it comes to our clients. Systems that have our EHR now want to extend the EHR capability and want to either build applications themselves and have confidence that they're secure, or work with a commercial vendor who has some application to offer to extend our platform. Our clients need to know that what to expect from the vendor, that patient's data is not at risk at any point during the process, that their system is not at risk, and finally, there is opportunity for all parties involved to either advance the solution offering or to pursue their economic interests. If you're a developer,
maybe just in terms of context, when you say trust, are these typically developers that would run an application in their own environment, be it a mobile or somewhere on the desktop or on the cloud, or are you also hosting some of these applications yourself?
Correct. So the question was whether we host some of the applications or whether developers are free to run their applications wherever they choose. We don't currently actually offer any hosting options. We host a couple of open source applications ourselves, just as a way of giving clients something to run after they've been connected to the API, so they can see the benefits of it without having to purchase a solution. But I am exposed to a lot of discussions with our existing EHR clients, and frequently the questions that come from them after they get past what is SMART, what is FHIR, the next question is, well, how do I know that I can trust this application to run and get patients' data and additional healthcare information from me? And that's where we go through the details of what we do in our validation program, and that there's certain level of expectations we place on the third parties we integrate with. App validation program is something that has evolved over the past few months, over to a year, where we really kind of polished up our approach to it. Once a developer, and here I'm strictly referring to a third-party commercial vendor who wants to build applications and run them within our system, once they enter into our developer program and they have an application they want to validate, at that point, we set them up for access to run that application within the EMR. We have a dedicated Sandbox environment, in addition to our open Sandbox that's just available on the website. We have a Citrix, basically a Citrix connection to run an application within the EHR software to look for additional concerns that may arise from the interaction with the individual, for example, or some workflow concerns. And once the developer enters this validation period, we look at basically 4 different aspects. One is security. We go through where the application is hosted. There's some work that we do with our security team, pretty lengthy questionnaire, some number of scans that are required to flesh out any potential vulnerabilities that the application may have. We go through UX review to make sure that some of the basic user experience that we embed into the EHR does not become compromised by these new applications being plugged in. And some of this stuff is very straightforward, like within the EHR we have certain visual clues that our end users are trained to respond in a certain way. So in Cerner, for example, a yellow field means that there is a required piece of information missing. So if a smart app comes along and tags the field yellow because the field is completed, that becomes a bit of a flash for our end users. As well as just some basic UX usability type things that some of our developers, who are a lot of the time smaller startups, they may not have the funds or the time to invest in UX design, which is some of the concerns here. Operational and technical aspects, that's primarily focused on making sure that we know how to interact between our 2 companies, and should there be any support issues, or if clients come to us directly and ask us how to get in touch with the developer around certain potential enhancements. So we basically document it there. And then finally, the functional component, that's where things could at times get pretty interesting. The main focus of that is to make sure that the application consumes the API correctly and gets the right data set out of it. Again, we're finding that with companies who are new to healthcare, maybe they have good technology background, but they're new to healthcare, sometimes things that they interpret one way are not what they really are in the EHR world. With the standards, in particular on ontology mappings, there's potential loss of fidelity in concepts. So we basically run the apps. We have people on our side who have some clinical functional input potentially. We say, well, this doesn't seem appropriate. Is this what you guys really wanted, intended to do here? We don't go into the depth of understanding the algorithm that the developer has embedded, but we do flesh out the obvious things, like if somebody is using a result that has been marked in error in their calculation, it becomes pretty obvious quickly, and that's something that we catch in that part. Now, this part is also where there's I think there's a lot of value to developer from being in the program. In particular, people who may be new to healthcare, while we're learning about the application and we're making sure that our clients can gain value from it. Developers also get a glimpse into the EHR world itself and see where the application integrates into our software, and if that's the best possible point of integration. They get to learn about our clients' workflows, and some of our clients will have very specific ideas on where in the workflow they want to access this application. So this exchange of ideas and value, I think, goes both ways. I think our developers gain valuable insights from that as well. So this is just a quick glimpse that the developer program, as I was saying, has started in earnest really in the past year. We've had some early iterations going back to 2015, where we worked very closely and became personal friends with a few companies. Now we're finally scaling it up. So the top above the line shows some of the recent graduates of our program, and then there's more companies coming in. It feels like things are starting to scale up a little bit. We're actually adding a little bit of staff to the development program now. And at the end of that, once the application has been validated and reviewed, it ends up on our app gallery. The intent is not really to compete, let's say, with the Smart Health IT gallery. It's more of to focus on the companies and applications that have been validated to run successfully within our EMR. This is where our clients would know that these applications are ready to be engaged with. A couple of screenshots of what it looks like. Josh Mandel, if you went to his session earlier, was showing education running off of Smart Health IT Sandbox. It's one of our success stories so far as well. They've integrated with us, have been live for over a year, a couple of clients. This shows them that same web application plugged into the HR software as a first-class component. And as we work through this program more with more clients and more developers, we're starting to enhance the number of launch points within our product where you can access smart applications. Because as we're learning from our clients, sometimes just the first-class component, sort of standalone app, is not enough. They want to integrate things into discharge workflow or maybe reconciliation workflow. So as we learn more about those use cases, we're starting to add more places where we can launch smart apps. So this is a different workflow metaphor within Cerner, and there's smart apps now being plugged into these, what we call pages that our clients use to actually structure which component of the system they access within the Cerner set of steps during workflow. Just a quick glimpse, as I was saying, the program has been scaling up. Our unique users in production, the number has been growing. It's nowhere near where we think we will end up, but these are physician, nursing, nurses, basically clinical users trend going up over the last few months. And even more encouraging, the slope of the app launches is steeper than the one that shows unique users. It shows that these apps are gaining steam and same people are using them frequently. I think we're going to cross 100,000 launches. The graph is an indication. So to recap the developer experience, everything's available on the website. You can engage with the website and look at the different documentation, experiment with our open API, our open Sandbox API. If you see that the API offers resources you need to build your application, you can take the next step, join the developer program, get validated, and then start marketing your solutions to our clients via App Gallery.
Thanks, Igor. Okay, I want to talk a bit about some specifics for developers who are wanting to work with us. A lot of the things I'm talking about, actually I'll distinguish between the things that actually require you to be in the program versus you don't. So first we have a public Google group that is moderated and watched every single day by the entire FHIR and SMART teams, development teams within Cerner. These are the developers like myself, Yegor, and actual people who are writing our FHIR server and our SMART support, so it's not like a separate developer relations team, it's the actual team doing the work. So that is a public Google group. Right now, I checked, we have 650 members. Those are people who are signed up on that Google group to receive emails with new posts. I'm sure there's more that just visit the page. And we field every day at least 5 questions a day in that Google group. So there's a ton of information in there. Anyone is free to ask questions or use it. And if you All the links from all the things that we're talking about are available off of code.cerner.com, which Diego already mentioned. So I didn't bother putting the long, nasty group URL here. We're big believers in open source. We have a Cerner GitHub organization, so if you go to github.com/Cerner, that's all of our open source projects. I'm going to call out the ones that are specific to our open APIs. Everything that we open source is Apache license. So if you're not familiar with the Apache license, it's a very permissive license that lets you do pretty much whatever you want with the code. So you could take our open source code and you could resell it if you wanted to. Apache allows that. So we think it's important that we release things under a very permissive license for people. Specifically around SMART and FHIR, we actually collaborated with cardiologists at Duke University to create this ASCVD risk calculator smart app. Anyone familiar with the cardiac risk smart app, the one in the smart app? Okay, so that smart app, for those that aren't familiar, it's open source. It was written several years ago as kind of like a example smart app from the Smart Health IT organization. That particular smart app uses what's called the Reynolds risk score to do the cardiac risk calculation to calculate whether a patient, like the risk the patient's going to have of an adverse cardiac risk event. Well, we originally were hosting that application for our clients, and we got some feedback from several clients that, one, the Reynolds risk score was not the latest risk score by leading cardiologists. Instead, they had moved on to what's called ASCVD risk calculation. Secondly, from a technical perspective, the UI for that particular smart app, while it looked kind of pretty, was it's questionable the licensing that it was released under, that particular design, because the design actually came from a separate organization not related to SMART on FHIR at all. And then also, the design was not responsive, it was not accessible, so colorblind users or blind users couldn't use it. So we teamed up with some cardiologists at Duke to basically create a brand new app from the ground up. We knew that we wanted to replace the previous open source cardiac risk app that we were hosting for Cerner clients. And since we were developing it for Duke, actually, for those that don't know, Duke is actually not a Cerner client. So Duke uses another competitor system. They don't use anything from us. But since we were working together on this, we thought that it was only right for us to open source all the work. That we weren't going to work with another organization and then try to claim ownership. So we open sourced everything. So we built this app from the ground up. It's got a completely responsive and accessible design, so it meets all of Cerner's UX standards. The functionality is based upon the ASCVD risk calculation, which is currently the best known cardiac risk algorithm. And again, it's completely free and open source. We host this for our Cerner clients, completely free for them. So we host it, and they, like Diego was mentioning, when they take our Ignite APIs, this is one of the apps that they get turned on immediately, so they can start using it. If you work at all of you work at other organizations, if you work in a clinical setting, feel free to go and take this application and run it. Any enhancements you make or fixes, please just log the issues to us so we know how to get those back into the community. We really would love contributions from other folks on this. And again, this application is hosted, and if you just go to github.com/Cerner, it's one of the apps listed in our projects page. We have two other projects that are open source that are of note to all of you. The first is we have this Cerner Smart Embeddable lib project. It's an NPM package intended for smart applications that are web applications that want to run, as Diego was talked about earlier, as an end-page component. So we have a lot of clients that their whole workflow is based upon this Cerner thing called M-Pages, and M-Pages are basically embedded web views inside of our EHR. And this NPM package, if you include that in your project, it allows your Smart app to run inside of that MPage container. Then we have this other project called FHIR Client Cerner Editions. For those who are using a web application or have a Smart app that's a web app, and you're using the FHIR client.js project, which is an open source project from the Smart Health IT, this is an extension to that project that allows your Smart app to run inside of a Windows application that is running an embedded browser. That's exactly what Cerner's EMR uses to host web content. So our EHR application is called PowerChart. It's a native Windows application, but the Smart apps that run inside of it are embedded, web content. Well, there's a particular technical reason, and I can get into it afterwards if you guys want to know the details. But basically, you need to include this into your project. And this actually is not, as it turns out, when we realized that we needed to create this, I reached out to other EHR vendors as well that I knew had native Windows applications that were running embedded web content. And it turns out two of those, actually I only reached out to two other vendors because I knew that those two particular were in the same boat. And I had them run a test, and they fell into the same category as this. And so even if you're running outside of Cerner, you'll want to include this for those other vendors as well. I can talk about it afterwards if you guys want to know the details. Linked off of that code.cerner.com is another webpage, which is FHIR.cerner.com. This is actually all of our developer documentation for SMART and FHIR. So on this webpage, we've got our FHIR API documentation for Millennium. That's again, our core EHR. We also have FHIR support in another one of our EHRs, which is the Saurian EHR. That came from our acquisition of Siemens several years ago. So all of that documentation is on there. That includes our Smart on FHIR documentation, our authorization server documentation, kind of an FAQ, as well as links to our Google group, and those open source links there. All the documentation is listed by resources, and it basically is your one-stop shop to learn about our FHIR APIs that we have implemented, all the different resources. Speaking of resources, as of today, these are all the resources that we support, and we are unique in that we don't just support reads for our resources. We actually, for some resources, support writes and updates. We're always adding on to this list of resources, and actually I don't think we talked about this earlier, but the way in which we decide which resources to go implement is based upon talking with our clients, so the healthcare organizations and their needs, as well as our third-party developers who are in our developer program that are expressing interest in certain resources. So every single resource, including the operations that we support on it, are purely based upon what people need, because we don't want to go build something and then no one's going to actually consume it and use it. So this is again, the latest one we have, and as we add new ones, we update FHIR.cerner.com. For those who are really astute, our FHIR.cerner.com is actually hosted as a GitHub Pages project, so it's in GitHub as well. So you can actually see what we're working on, because we'll go and be reviewing the documentation updates, and so there's some people that know exactly, oh, this is going to get dropped out here in the next few weeks or so, because they can see us, our internal development team, commenting on the documentation and kind of refining it and reviewing it. And again, going back to what I talked about earlier, when we add new resources, when we add new operations to existing resources, that all gets turned on immediately. So as soon as it goes to FHIR.cerner.com, it's live in production everywhere. You can, every Cerner client that has our Ignite API support will immediately start having that functionality. The code console is the developer console where you can register your Smart applications to test against our FHIR server. So you can test your application against our open FHIR sandbox that doesn't require any OAuth 2. We have a secure FHIR sandbox that honors the OAuth 2 Smart on FHIR workflow. You can launch your Smart apps from within the code console that act like a embedded EHR launch. We also allow, in addition to clinician-facing or provider-facing apps, you can launch apps as a patient-facing application as well. So this is like your one-stop shop. It's all self-service within So we've got some exercises for everybody, and I've got handouts for those that want them. And the handout basically has just this URL and exactly the content of the slide here. But basically, we've created a open source tutorial for everyone where you can go and create your own Smart app and register that application within our code console, which is Cerner's Sandbox and developer console. And the tutorial also has you register it against the Smart Health IT Sandbox as well. And that shows that your Smart app can run against multiple different systems without any code changes. So it's a self-service tutorial. Again, the URL is on the handout, and it's also open source. So if you guys have any improvements or changes, feel free to submit them as pull requests. With that, we've got a few minutes for questions, and thank you for your time. Yes?
You talk about single URL, which sounds like a great idea, until you're in Britain, and your data's in Britain, and you're calling API in America to retrieve.
So, yes, the question was, you got a single URL, which sounds great, but what about Britain, or pick any other non-US region? And I'll clarify my statements. So we have a single URL today that is for our US customers, our clients. As we move into other regions, the URL will be particular to that region. So that diagram where I showed you that cloud, that will actually be duplicated per region. So for instance, we're in the midst of deploying to Australia right now. Don't know if I was supposed to say that, but oh well. And so that's going to have its own region, its own URL. So, yeah. So we've got the data locality stuff covered.
We're in the discussion stage on that.
Give us a surprise.
Yes. So you mentioned a few times on the slides that you do vocabulary ontology mapping for these meaning systems higher. Can you say a little bit about that? So, like
yeah,
how much Cerner-specific codes are in the original millennium, and how much you translate or unify?
That's a great question. The question was, how do you deal with vocabulary mappings between Cerner proprietary codes and standards? So all of Cerner clients have proprietary codes because the standard codes didn't exist when our EHR was created years and years ago, right? The standards weren't in the same shape. Some clients over the years have mapped, they still have the proprietary codes, but then they've got aliases to the standards in some situations. For what we're doing with our Ignite APIs, and actually this work started before our support for FHIR, but we, as part of the process of installing the Ignite APIs, they go and map their concepts to standards so that our FHIR API is serving up standard values. Now, the mapping process is actually quite large and elaborate. We have a whole organization that is just focused on mapping. As an aside, our population health platform requires that as well as some other solutions that came before that, like our mobile applications. So this organization has been around for quite some time, and they use all sorts of measures to map everything. At the end of the day, the Cerner suggested mapping, what we think things map to, actually goes to the client, and the client has to sign off on everything. But yeah, we've got that covered. Any other questions? We have time for one more question. Yes.
Do you support SDU3, DSU2, both?
Great question. Yeah, so right now we just have DSU2 in production, but we have SDU3.
We're creating a roadmap for the coming year. There's an uplift on that roadmap. We haven't set the particular dates, but in the next 12 months, we will be going through an uplift of some sort. We're at the point of tactically figuring out which resources will get uplifted first and which ones would go next. And we're also examining the dates for the R4 and seeing where the next transition would make sense for us.
All right, both Jaeger and I will be around all week, so if you guys have any other questions, catch us in the hallway. Thank you very much, everyone.